Next podcast with Chris and Todd.
Well, hey, welcome back to the next podcast. Good to see you. Man, I tell you what, we get to do this. We love it. We don't have sponsors yet. So, I mean, I guess if you know people looking for sponsorships on a really minimally listened to podcast that you really would like to highlight.
Man, we sold that.
That's right.
So anybody listening who would like to advertise their business.
I always laugh at that. Like, this podcast sponsored by, and I'm like, we don't have. It would
at this point be free.
We don't have virtual assistants. So yeah, I mean, sponsored by Karina today. Hey, Karina, thanks for that sponsorship. Yeah. So she doesn't even know it yet. Surprise. Yeah. No, but if you have been listening, hey, we appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in. If one of these just engages you in a different way and you're like, hey, I feel like I need to just share that with somebody, we'd love it. It's fantastic that this medium provides opportunities to connect with people in different ways, and something that we enjoy doing. And so we're going to actually dive in. We call it Next Podcast. And just really want to talk about those next steps, things of faith. And today is definitely one of those things. After the message this last weekend with you sharing about the helmet of salvation, and I think it resonated with a lot of people just walking out those different things. And we're going to take time to break those down, but really just the reminder of what salvation is and what salvation isn't. And that was a good, for lack of a better word, a good refresher for people. Mm-hmm. And I think that put us in a good place for a good conversation today. So
I'm curious for you. I mean, we've been doing ministry for a while. You've seen a lot of people interpret salvation in interesting ways.
Yeah.
I mean, simply put, salvation is, keyword is deliverance from. Yeah. But in the church world, we've made it, hey, pray this prayer, do this moment, that kind of stuff. And so I'm just curious, as you've thought through, like, hey, what's been the unhealthy dynamics you've seen with how maybe we've approached salvation? Yeah. And then what are the key things? And we'll talk through one of the areas, but we'll kind of have multiple episodes here of just explaining, hey, do we understand the full weight of salvation? But I wanted to start, like, where does it get confusing?
I think it gets confusing. One of the areas that I think is just to get me out of trouble. Like, I just want this assurance that everything's going to be all right. So as long as, like you said, as long as I prayed the prayer, or I was baptized, or I went through confirmation, and that was always, one of those things where you're like, okay, you did something, and that's great, but we fail to take that next step of, okay, what now does that mean? And how do we follow that out? It's not just I did it, so I must be good now. You know what I mean? And sometimes we tell each other that, like, hey, you prayed a prayer, you're good. And you're like, man, once we come to realize that it's so much more than that, right? I think that's an unhealthy dynamic. I think it's unhealthy when it's convenient. It's unhealthy when it's convenient for us too. Like, oh yeah, this will be really good for, and I've seen this, like, for me to do this in front of people, for them to think differently or highly of me. And, and shoot, I'll be honest, I did that as a kid at youth camp. Like, I really like so-and-so. If she sees me go up and, like, recommit my life, she's awesome. She's really, she's going to think I'm more spiritual. Yeah. And
I know she said she's looking for a very spiritual guy yesterday. So
yeah. And I think this goes along with what I'm saying. We do it because we think it's going to fix something in
we see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We see that in some of our counseling with married couples. All of a sudden, you've got one of them being like, "Fine, okay, I'll try the Lord." Yeah, I know this make you happy, and it's like, no, that's not.
It's not about doing it for somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Preach there.
Yeah.
You go there. And I think that's the hard part. It's not a transaction. Yep. It's not, hey, if I do this, I get this.
Yeah. We want it to be, right?
We want it to be.
We always want it to be that easy. We want it to be something like, man, that was good. I feel good about that. We have a good moment where it's like, man, that's exactly what I needed. And then, like always, or not like always, but like a lot of times we walk away and forget. It's kind of like that scripture. It's like somebody who looks in the mirror and walks away and forgets what he looks like. Oh, man. And but it's powerful. And we'll get to this, but it's sometimes not just a one and done. It's like a recommitting and a re-walking out of reconnecting. But there is really a powerful thing about humbly coming in that one moment and saying, God, my life is yours. And
because that's the starting point.
Yeah.
Like it's got to have a moment to where you surrender and you go, all right, I believe in God. I believe in the salvation that He's offering.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to discredit the moment. I think the moment is critical, but I think that's where we stop.
Yep. Yeah.
I make the analogy here of like, that would be like you getting to your wedding day and then going, all right, I'm good.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
Trying
I
to
told you I
love
loved you once.
Right.
You're good.
We're married now. We're good.
Yep.
And that's the part where I think in the spiritual dynamic and in just believing in Jesus, we just got to be careful of treating salvation like it's this, we had a moment.
Yep.
Now I'm good.
Yeah.
And there's this, I think what salvation reveals is we need salvation in so many other areas too, because it's deliverance from. And so it's got to start somewhere.
Yep.
And so part of it, we're going to walk through 4 different components. So one of the areas that we're going to talk about is, first area is forgiveness.
Yeah.
And salvation is kind of starting in forgiveness is like this debt has been paid.
Yeah.
But here's the other part. Salvation, we do treat it as like hey, I get out of hell kind of deal.
Yeah.
What we will walk through is heavy in the sense of we will look at this and go, I don't deserve this.
Yeah.
And so that becomes very conversation. Most of us don't like having those conversations because we would rather earn it, or we would rather be like, hey, let me prove to you that I'm worth saving. But from what I've seen in scriptures, a lot of salvation and the components to salvation have to do with God doing something that we don't deserve.
Dude, the longer that I'm a pastor and the longer that I'm a follower of Jesus, like even last night, I was talking with some guys, and the heaviness with which I read some scripture and we talked about some stuff, really, it was even more serious. And maybe that's because you're talking about with other guys and you want them to grasp it too, right? But like that idea of forgiveness, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's heavy. Like at my worst, at my very worst, Christ chose to say, I forgive you. I forgive you for those things that you've done, those things that you're going to do. And just that powerful moment of knowing that somebody cared about me that much, that was willing to forgive who I've been and who I continue to be.
Yeah, that there's a debt there that you've screwed some things up.
Yeah.
And Jesus paid for all of that.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't connect because we know we've hurt other people or we don't actually notice how much we've hurt God.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I could get it. You don't really see God, and so you don't necessarily like go, oh man, look
what
at
have
that.
I done to you? Like,
yeah. You don't see his face. You don't see him crying. You don't see him broken in that. But the reality is that is what he's experiencing.
Yeah.
Whenever we've broken that, he's like that hurt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that broke me. And that's not who I want you to be. And so he's going, but I forgive you.
Yeah. And understanding that, I mean, it became more apparent, right? When you're a parent, when you're a parent. Yeah. There you go. Great alliteration, Chris. Anyway, but just like, like, because I know my girls see the look on my face, and Rachel's had to like curve that a little bit. Like, hey, by the way, if you could put that face away for a little bit, and not that God just sits there and scowls at us. Like, that's the one thing, like when I'm doing parenting right, which I wish was more than it was, but like the face of love, like I want my child to know that even though they did something, I still love them and I care about them. And that's, that gets into the other aspects of what we want to talk about, but it's powerful to look at your kid and say, I forgive you. It's fine. It's,
For you, I mean, we know the scriptures, you just alluded to it, of how God speaks of he forgives us.
Yeah.
But your own journey with forgiveness, when was the time that you started really like, maybe the toughest time you had to offer forgiveness?
Yeah.
And what was the time that you had to ask for forgiveness? Like either or. I feel like for me, parenting has taught me a lot about offering forgiveness.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely.
But also being married has taught me a lot about offering forgiveness, because you get hurt.
Yeah.
By those people that you love and live with.
Yeah.
And but there's also just dynamics. I mean, especially being pastors, we've had moments to where I don't want to forgive that person.
Yeah.
they were brutal.
Mm-hmm.
They were mean.
Yeah.
But learning to be like, well, if I hold on to this, it doesn't help me any.
It's true. Like, and it really isn't ever about the other person, right? Like, it's always about you. And I would say there have been moments and times through the course of my ministry where I've been holding on to something, and I'm like, and God is just like tapping me on the shoulder saying, why are you not forgiving and moving on? Mm-hmm. You're hindering yourself, or you're not thinking of them like I think about them. You know what I mean? And but I would agree with your scenario of parenting, like offering forgiveness, but also my marriage is so key, of being forgiven by a spouse where I mess up or I say something or I have to go back and say, man, and I'll be honest, I don't think all of us are good at forgiveness, right? Like, it's not bred in us to be like, oh, please forgive me. All right. Hey, and really mean it, right? We're good at that pseudo forgiveness. Hey, forgive me. Let's move on so we can get back to relationship.
So I can feel better about myself.
Yeah, that's right. But really understanding the depths of which I hurt my wife. Mm-hmm. And I can recall one time where I said something and I can still remember. I can remember because I visual sometimes, like I can remember the room we were in. We were in Rapid City, and I said something in front of other people that I shouldn't have said. Mm-hmm. And I remember having to go to her that night and say, listen, I know that what I did hurt you, and I am sorry. And it wasn't like, hey, give me a hug. That's great. Yeah. She's like, yeah, don't let it happen again. Mm. And from that moment on, I feel like we have had this freedom of knowing, like, when we are close to each other or apart from each other, what we say about one another is not something, unless we would say it in front of the other person, and that it would bring them honor, And one of the things we talk about, where there's dishonor, there's dysfunction, and I think when there's a lack of unforgiveness, dysfunction can creep into our lives because there's not authenticity and in the relationship. And so, oh man, I tell couples all the time, and you do too, I know, honesty and truth have to be at the forefront. And that's what God desires when we come and ask, God, I'm sorry that I've tried to do life my own way. Will you forgive, and will you lead my life? And that's such a powerful place to be.
Yeah. I know for me, I remember vividly, like, a couple moments, and I've had mine to share with Tina, my wife, and my kids, but I remember, I think I was in second grade, maybe older, like fourth.
Yeah.
But we just had to wear our desks kind of in a group of four, and they all kind of faced each other. And so I had a friend right next to me. His name was Adam, and the girl across from us, her name was Tamara, was just giving him a hard time. Yeah. And so I decided to chime in. And what I said, I can still, it was so mean.
Yeah.
And I just cringed, but I was like, I just went after, like, well, at least he doesn't have, and she had at this time, like some crooked teeth, and I said, big lips. And I was like, at the time, didn't realize what I was saying, but just making observations.
Yes. Because you're an observing guy.
I still feel it right now. I'm just like, oh, why did I do that?
Yeah.
And so, but you watch somebody just crumble.
Yeah.
Like, she just...
Their demeanor is just, taken down.
Oh, it was awful.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I got in trouble from the teacher. Yeah. Teacher called my parents. So and
your dad is a police officer.
Yes,
your dad
he is.
Like a little more intense. Like, did he come down in his uniform?
So this was a big moment for me.
Yeah.
To where it was more my mom. My mom was like, you will call this girl and you will be apologizing. And so I did. But it was one of those moments. I'll never forget the phone call. I'll never forget the moment, all that kind of stuff. But here was the dangerous thing I kind of learned with forgiveness. Yeah. It was like, it fixes things.
Yep. Yeah.
And so I started to treat it like, okay, if I hurt somebody, I'm sorry. Hey, I'm sorry. Even like get into marriage, it'd be like, oh, something's off. Tina, I probably did something wrong. I'm sorry. And so I was quick to forgive. Yeah. The older I've gotten, I've had to learn, like, wait, do you understand, like, there's weight behind this.
Yeah,
Let's not be so quick.
You don't want to make it cheap.
I don't want to make it cheap.
Yeah.
And I felt like for many years of my life, because of that moment, I did go, well, I don't want to feel that again.
Yeah.
So I will be quick
Yeah.
to forgive people and make them try to feel better, make myself try to feel better without understanding the weight of it. So take that into my dynamic with just walking out my relationship with the Lord. And I think this took me a while because I didn't love sitting in this one.
No, yeah, absolutely.
No one does.
Nope.
Where you're sitting there like, well, I screwed things up. Sorry, Lord. Hopefully you forgive me. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Like, I think you said it well when you said like we just want to move on.
Yeah.
And having to learn to sit in it.
Yeah.
Having to learn to see what Jesus went through.
Yeah.
Because that's what affected me. When I was 12 years old and like started my journey with the Lord, I saw on video Jesus being crucified.
Yep.
Like they reenacted it, of course. And I'm like, whoa, like if that's how much pain he had to go through for me to be forgiven, that wrecked me.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that is like, my journey with forgiveness has been an interesting one.
Mhm.
I'll say it that way.
Okay.
But now having years and also becoming a pastor and learning the depths of this, of going, wait, there was a debt that could not be repaid.
Mm-hmm.
It just couldn't.
Yeah.
Like, as much as even I look at that, like, Jesus needs to forgive me for that one thing I said to that girl.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I can't repair that just by saying, hey, I'm sorry.
Yep.
But what Jesus did on the cross made it possible for those things to actually be forgiven.
Yep.
And it actually matters. And to where, and this is where I think the part that's powerful is like, we don't have to sit in our sin
Yeah.
any longer. And the person who's been hurt can learn to let go of the pain that's been caused to them. So that's the power of this, to where it's, yes, like, I don't want to go down the road of like, because we'll explain this later.
Yeah.
But I was like, it's not like, hey, you're forgiven, you get to go to heaven.
Yeah.
It's no, you're forgiven from the pain you caused the Lord.
Yep.
But
yet we sit in that. Like you
gotta sit in that. You gotta understand the weight of that. Like, your sins put him on the cross.
Yeah.
And so, because I think Hebrews alludes to that, of like, your sins nailed him to the cross.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, and I think the danger is that we know that God forgave us, but we can't forgive ourselves.
yeah, and that's
that could be a whole nother topic. Like the idea of like, okay, if God's forgiven you and you've gotten forgiveness from the other person, you know, like you've got to, how do you learn to release that?
But I think it's important for us to talk about, because I go, you're nailing something that I go, but this is the dynamic of salvation.
Mm-hmm.
It is not just like, okay, bam, you learned some forgiveness. Now God's going to go, but do you understand how to forgive yourself?
Yep,
Great,
absolutely.
you've experienced forgiveness from me, but if you can't forgive you, you really haven't actually
And usually,
experience forgiveness.
There's such a roadblock there for us to enter into new or different relationships or different levels of relationship if we're not willing to cross that barrier of like, okay, I've forgiven myself. I don't want to do that again. I'm not going to intentionally do that again. And granted, sometimes we do, and we walk that line of like, we're forgiven, but man, why do we keep dipping our toes back in those waters and not testing the Lord, but man, testing the reality of like, am I really serious about this? Is this really impactful to me? Am I treating this like am I treating this cheaply? And I don't want to treat it cheaply. And I think sometimes we do that when it comes to temptation, or we come to things that we've dealt with after we've given our lives to Christ. Like, man, I think there's such a power when we can step into that realization of what he has and what he desires for us when it comes to that desire for relationship with us, because it really is meant to draw us closer to him and closer into understanding what he's done and what he wants.
Yeah, there's so much there.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
good, though. But I know for me personally, walking through that, like, forgiveness was like, okay, use it as a quick fix to help people.
Yep.
Make sure the relationship's better. I think learning to forgive myself took a lot longer.
Yep. Yep.
And so that's when I started to learn to forgive myself. And by that, looking at the mirror and going, hey, you're not great today. But you're forgiven.
Yeah.
That debt has been paid.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to it's not that you don't sit in it, but you don't need to wallow in it. I guess maybe that would be the better term of just but you don't have to stay there.
Yeah.
So you can look in the mirror and be able to go, okay, I can learn to give myself some grace.
Yeah.
I'm delivered from that
Yeah.
pain I caused.
Yeah. Well,
so-
yeah, just those reminders like of Romans 6, like the old is gone and the new has come, right? Like this idea of like that salvation was meant for you to realize that there should be a newness in you. And I think that's powerful when we understand forgiveness, like, oh man, this is new. And I can live something out differently and we have to live something out differently once we're forgiven.
And so that becomes a question I think that's good to be like, okay, so we're talking about forgiveness.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? Because it feels like it's a one-time deal.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean to making new? I heard it said this way, and I thought it was very helpful. When we recognize we have sin, we are quicker to move to forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we kind of close that gap. Where before we're like, well, I'm not going to go forgive that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'm not going to seek forgiveness from God because I don't even know if I did anything wrong yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's like there's a little bit more of a gap. I think when I was more immature in this area or was learning that I was delivered from, that it took me longer to get to that forgiveness.
Yeah.
Now the new person goes, oh no, I have to learn to take on this forgiveness every day.
Yep.
Like I'm putting it on and I'm quicker to be like, oh God, if I did something wrong, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
Yep.
I know I'm delivered from this. Oh, if I hurt somebody, oh, hey, I'm so sorry for what I did. Please understand that is not my heart in this.
Well, yeah, because we don't want anything that's
Right.
going to be a barrier in that relationship.
But you're quick to do it instead of being like, well, here's why I did this.
Yeah.
And here's, if they wouldn't have responded this
Yep.
way, I wouldn't have done that. I think when I was probably more in the immature, I was more justifying, trying to help people understand my behavior than recognizing just go after forgiveness. It's so much much more powerful than this.
Oh yeah, you look at your kids, you're like, here's why I'm not going to forgive you. You're like, no, wait a minute.
Prime example.
Because that's what we do, right? Like, well, you acted this way, or you prodded me into this, or you consistently make bad decisions. Oh, quit justifying those. Quit justifying your lack of forgiveness when saying, I forgive you. Now let's work towards something that's going to help us grow in relationship. Because I don't want okay, this is a little bit of a side note, but like I was
tangent. Here we go.
Tangent. No, like, so I was an emotional kid tied to music as a kid. And so Lauren L. Harris, big man, that's a throwback. I don't know if you ever remember it. He sang a song, I Miss My Time With You, right? Like, I miss my time with you, those moments together. I need to be with you each day. It hurts me when you say you're too busy trying to serve me, but how can you love me when your spirit's empty? And I think that when we have unforgiveness, there's an emptiness in our life that blocks us from experiencing God in a powerful way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we haven't been delivered from it.
Yep.
If you're not willing to walk through the forgiveness, then you will always have a sin problem.
Yep.
You will.
Yep.
There's no way for you to get rid of the sins that you've committed unless you learn forgiveness.
Yeah.
And recognize forgiveness is not just, okay, I did that one time and I won't sin anymore.
Yeah.
No, it is for the forgiveness of your past, present, and future.
Yep.
So this is where, when it says deliverance from, salvation is this ongoing. I think of the scriptures that said, let God complete the work that he started in you. That is the salvation that he started in you needs to get to its completion.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of like forgiveness is not the one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a powerful reminder. And so hope that as you think about those things, as you think about your forgiveness and coming to God, that maybe this would be a conversation that would prompt you to say, God, are there things that I haven't said I'm sorry about? And really, maybe there are things that are keeping you from taking that next step in faith. Or maybe there really is something with someone else where you need to go, hey, I need to go make this right.
I think there's never a loss in understanding our salvation even more.
Yep.
I think too often we kind of have that moment and then we just leave it there and put it on the shelf.
Yep.
Our hope in this conversation is you take it off the shelf, start dissecting it a little bit, start understanding it more, because I think the more you understand your salvation and the more you lean into it, the more these other areas like your faith and your knowledge of God have the opportunity to grow.
Absolutely.
If you don't know
hands down.
how you were saved and why you were saved and just how awesome God is in that, then you miss out on understanding the full relationship he wants with you.
Yeah, Absolutely. And really, that really is part of that next step of understanding the fullness of relationship. And that's another podcast in and of itself. So
Well, let's go.
Yeah, get fired up. No, but man, if this has been beneficial or you have questions, you want to sit down and chat, don't hesitate to let us know.
Yeah.
We'd love to be able to have an ongoing conversation about what's going on in your life, and pray it encourages you. So we'll see you next time.